And just like that, we're back and we're getting set for some big time action from UFC Paris. And out is a fight between Yannis Ghemmouri, who's supposed to be taking on Caolan, Loughran, and all of a sudden Taylor Lapilus, he's supposed to be taking on Lucas Almeida. You've got William Gomis, who's supposed to be taking on, well, Lucas Almeida. Taylor Lapilus was supposed to take on Muin Gaforov. Gaforov is out of the matchup against Lapilus. Almeida is out of the matchup against William Gomis. So all of a sudden, the UFC does the old switcheroo. Thank you very much. We'll see you later. And we end up with two completely new fights on the Tuesday before the fight. So some absolutely wild action right there. All of a sudden, you end up in a situation where William Gomis is going to be taking on Yannis Ghemmouri. That one is at featherweight. Ghemmouri was originally scheduled to fight at bantamweight against Loughran, and Loughran gets the bantamweight draw against a former UFC fighter, the two-timer that is Taylor Lapilus. So we're going to focus on both these fights. You can find them in the individual playlists. But when you look at the first matchup between these guys, Matt, William Gomis taking on Yannis Ghemmouri. These two guys at featherweight, that's a great move, I think, for Ghemmouri. It would have been Ghemmouri's first fight at bantamweight since 2021 were he to take on Caolan Loughran. And in that matchup, you had the kickboxing, Muay Thai styles of a guy like Ghemmouri taking on the boxing and the grappling of a guy like Loughran. And now we look at this matchup, Matt. I think these two guys match up pretty darn well together. If you look at a guy like William Gomis, we touched on it before he took on Jarno Aarons in that UFC debut. Gomis at 13, he was a runner. He was a distance runner. And then all of a sudden he had a friend at 13 that said, hey, you should get into Sonda. He becomes a junior national champion. He amasses this really nice record in Europe. He had those early stumbling losses to Morgan Charriere and Saladin Palnas. So listen, that's forgivable. And of course, you have Gomis and Charriere on this card. But when you go back and watch Gomis, and then you look at Yannis Ghemmouri, and I know we're going to go into the intricacies in some of their fights. Gomis in the UFC, I don't think we've seen the best version. But at the same time, if you watch Gomis's last three fights with Arias against Marcos, who's a short notice draw, replacing Kenan Barao, the greatest bantamweight of all time. You watch the Marcos fight, and then you watch the two fights that Gomis has had inside of the UFC. One against Jarno Aarons, majority decision win. One of the judges, Christophe Chapuis, scored the third round, a 10-10 in that fight. And then Gomis's last time out against Fire Francis Marshall, a split decision win. Gomis's USA debut in MMA. Split decision win over Francis Marshall, majority decision win over Jarno Aarons. Super, super tentative, Matt. And numbers, when you've only had two UFC fights, they're not even worth mentioning, but I will mention them for this fact, Matt. William Gomis, in two fights, 30 minutes of UFC action, 1.97 significant strikes landed per minute to 1.17 absorbed. They've been nothing burgers of UFC fights for poor William Gomis. So looking for a good showing against the man who's riding a 9-fight win streak in Yannis Ghemmouri in this one.
This is one of those fights, and I brought it up about Farid Basharat on the earlier fight, or the first fight on the card. It was, hey, you're this hyped up prospect, right? At a certain point, you kind of got to go out there and start getting finishes and looking really impressive in some of these performances. And I couldn't agree any more with what you said about William Gomis. He's won his UFC fights, but there has been a lot left to be desired. And they have been odd performances, right? Against Aarons, he goes for quite a few takedowns himself, looks pretty good with his own offensive wrestling, to be expected when you are fighting a guy who has the background of an Aarons, who is such a credited kickboxer. But still, to then see him just really have a hard time getting Francis Marshall off of him in that matchup was a little surprising to see, because I thought he would at least be a little bit more competitive in some of those grappling exchanges. And you bring up the significant strike numbers. It was right. It was just a low volume fight. And it was one of those fights where you assume, okay, the few more strikes he was able to land than Marshall is probably the difference between the two. But I didn't think he looked good in that Francis Marshall fight whatsoever. And I know Marshall is a decent fighter. He's another guy kind of on the come up, but still, I thought Gomis is going to have a lot more success in that matchup than he did. And that's one of those fights, you know me, I don't get too tied up about, hey, this guy should have won, that guy should have won. I thought Francis Marshall won that fight, if you want my honest opinion.
Yeah, and it really is tricky. Again, as I mentioned, it's Gomis's USA debut. He misses weight at 147. So then he comes into this fight against Yannis Ghemmouri. And we talked a lot, again, about Ghemmouri in the full card video. Supposed to be taking on Caolan Loughran out of Ireland. But for Ghemmouri, I mean, Climax Fight Academy, main training partner of Fares Ziem, the Smile Killer. And Ghemmouri has that experience of already stepping into, or at least towards, the octagon and the apron. He was there for Ziem's big win over Jai Herbert not that long ago. But if you do look at it, Instagram bio for Ghemmouri saying K1 champ, camp. He's 15-0 in kickboxing and Muay Thai. And you go back and you watch his fights. He debuted in 2014. From 2014 to 2017, those kind of French mixed rules fights, which William Gomis would have had as well. 5-1 for Ghemmouri. Going down through it, not the most active of fighter is a guy in Yannis Ghemmouri. 2 fights in 2021, 1 in 2022, and 1 so far in 2023 back in late June. The one loss that he has by triangle choke years ago. But going back through and watching these fights, I don't know. I had a hard time. We talk about activity out of both of these guys. For Yannis Ghemmouri, he's got power when he decides to actually land his hands, and Ghemmouri tends to push more of a pace than William Gomis does. We saw this with Gomis's probably most fun fight that you've ever seen, his fight against Tobias Harila. I mean, that guy, he was supposed to be on Contender Series this summer, but it wouldn't materialize. But Gomis against Harila just marches him forward like a Sean Strickland type, and Gomis is able to land really big shots, big kicks on the outside, made it a fun fight, grappled in his own right. But Yannis Ghemmouri pushes that pace. He throws a low volume of strike. Matt, this is a pure coincidence, but today I went to Walmart because obviously I'm not home. I think this fight is going to be like Jell-O Super Mix candies. It's going to be sugary. It's going to be very disappointing. And ultimately, it's going to be a blob of a fight. Neither one of these guys really do anything that wows in a lot of their fights. I know Ghemmouri has a lot more in terms of finish ability. And again, he wasn't really beating the highest level of competition with UAE Warriors, with Brave as well. He's got a really nice clinch when he's striking from the southpaw stance. He's got a really nice left as a straight. But when he switches over to orthodox, he can throw that front left as a really nice jab. He can really snap the head back of his opponents. But I'm not all that amped for this fight, if I'm being completely honest with the fans.
So this is what I think is going to be the really big key to the matchup for both guys, really. Can Gomis keep that kicking distance? Because when he did have success against Francis Marshall, he had good teeps up the middle. He was doing a good job when he was able to maintain that range and keep Francis from just getting in and collapsing that distance. So if Gomis can not replicate that same performance, I don't think his coaches are saying, hey, fight to a split decision there, kid. But if he can use some of that distance and initiate some of those kicks up the middle, because the thing about Ghemmouri is he will just stand there with his hands up sometimes. If you are able to initiate the leg kicks and the body kicks especially, it might be able to slow down some of that pace moving forward, because if Ghemmouri is going to have success in this matchup, he's going to have to get Gomis behind those 2 black lines and really do significant damage, I would say, when he is able to get the fight in those positions, because Gomis is a good defensive fighter. I know his fights have been fairly close, but it's not like he's getting rocked by big shots. When he is at distance, he does a good job defensively. He's not getting hit by a lot of shots. And again, this kind of goes into your point about maybe this isn't the most exciting fight of all time. If Gomis is just on the outside playing a Christophe Jotko game of, hey, I'm going to land a little bit more volume than you, you're not going to be able to hit me with big shots, then yes, he should be able to go out there and get a nice win. But I really do think Ghemmouri's going to have to try to make this ugly and get on the inside and use some of those clinches.
There are very few fighters that give up as much distance in an octagon as William Gomis. He seems to be fine with playing behind that black line of an octagon, and that scares you against a guy with that Thai pressure style of Yannis Ghemmouri. He's one of those guys too. Like, he will kind of square up a little bit. His leg kicks are awesome. If you go back and watch his fight against Steppen, he nearly stops him with leg kicks like he's Chris Gutierrez, and in the end of it, he gets the TKO victory. So when we do look at a fight like this, Matt, I believe William Gomis is favored in the matchup. The fight just dropped this morning as we tape this on Tuesday. We have a look at the Tapology votes. 151 of them, short sample size, 93% going with William Gomis to get the win. I do have him to get the win, but Matt, I don't feel all that great about it. Again, Yannis Ghemmouri, from what we've seen against not really the greatest level of competition, pushes a nice pace. He can keep it steady throughout his fights. Both these guys share that. But again, I don't think this is going to be the most aesthetically pleasing fight. I think if I had the popcorn shirt on being away, I would wear it, because I'd stay away from this fight if it was me.
Ghemmouri has a really nice record coming into the UFC, but I think I broke it down pretty well on our earlier prediction. Like, I just don't know where his skills put him as a ceiling for the division. Maybe he beats William Gomis in this matchup and it completely changes my opinion of him, but I do have Gomis in this one. I do think he is going to be able to evade some of those bigger shots. And again, I bring up Christophe Jotko on purpose. Like, if he is able to use that kind of a game plan to, hey, continue having distance, use my kicks effectively. I do like the teep kicks out of Gomis, and I do think that's going to start halting some of that forward pressure of Ghemmouri. So for those reasons, I've got William Gomis.
A big time featherweight matchup on really short notice. We've got a lot of really interesting ones on this card, including that thrown together bout between Caolan Loughran. He's going to be taking on Taylor Lapilus. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say.
Let's get into it.